as I mentioned before, minimize the applications running in the background. Video tends to be a very processor intensive thing on your computer, so if you're running a lot of stuff in the background and doing some pretty intense video, that can create problems. So ideally you have nothing else running on your system besides eduFire. And also, very, very important, make sure there's nothing running that's going to suck up your bandwidth. So if you're using something to download, if you're using iTunes to download a movie, and that's happening in the background while you're teaching eduFire, your performance probably isn't going to be very good, because there's a lot of bandwidth tied up by this video going back and forth, both your downstream video, of course, but even more importantly, your upstream video. And then the third thing is make sure the room you're in is very well lighted. So this is something that I've seen a lot of. There's a lot of people that look like they're doing eduFire from a cave, and that's fine, like nothing wrong with that. Having said that, obviously the experience is better for you as a teacher, for your students, if they can actually see your face, if it's bright, if it's sunshiny like it is right now. That's a better thing. So what you want to do ideally is you want to make sure your room is very well lighted, and actually go to the extreme of saying get as much light in the room as you can. If natural light is the best, if you're by a window, just as long as you make sure to control for the shadow, that's fantastic. Right now, actually, it's funny, if anyone was watching here, they'd see that I actually have, and hopefully this won't blind anybody, but I have 2 lamps that are actually placed on either side of my head right now. So this is, my way. My apartment tends to be a little bit dark at times during the day, and so this is my way of making sure there's more room. And certainly your camera quality makes sense. That is also something that the better quality camera you have, the better you're going to get in terms of this, and the less that the light's going to be an issue. But for most people, we typically tell them, get as much light in the room as possible. It definitely helps the experience. And over time, I think this is going to be even more fun as we get more people with high def cameras, and there's going to be some really fun stuff that's going to happen in the future. But for right now, simple, easy tip: make sure you have a lot of light in your room. Tip number 6, visual aids. So what we've seen is that having a presentation is typically a good idea for classes that you teach on eduFire. You don't have to have one. Certainly it's not a requirement, but for the most part, having a presentation is good. It gives some structure to the class. It allows for the students to have something else to look at besides just your face for an hour or 2 hours or whatever. And it's also something you can share with the students afterwards. So it's a great way for them to have some review opportunities. And so having a presentation is definitely a good idea. You can just simply create a PowerPoint presentation. That's the easiest way to do it. If you're on a Mac, I'm on a Mac, you can create a presentation in Keynote, and you can export that as a PPT file, which is what I did today, and you can see it works. It works fantastic. Other visuals, images, charts. I used a chart in my last GMAT class. Things like that work out very well too. It's just good to give people things that they can look at during the class as well. It helps to break up a little bit of, sometimes if it gets a little bit monotonous, it's, hey, let me throw up a good image, or let me throw up a chart, or let me throw up a presentation. One of the things that I would highly recommend, if you haven't read it yet, is to read the book Presentation Zen. It's an amazing book. There's a website, presentationzen.com, that contains a lot of other good information as well. But that book will really change the way that you think about presentations. I'm actually going against some of their principles here in today's presentation. I've got a little bit too much text on my slides, but read the book. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. It'll do wonders for your presentation making ability, because a good presentation definitely is something that's very impressive. I've seen a few teachers here who have just had fantastic presentations. Sandra's presentation was fantastic. Koichi did a great presentation last week. I know I'm leaving out some of you as well, but having a great presentation, it's professional. It's something that helps the students to learn. It's a takeaway that they can use in the future. It's all around just a great way to go. So moving on, number 7 is recording. So this is something that this is kind of brand new. So in the last couple of weeks, we've started to record some of the classes that have happened here on eduFire. And the reason for recording, hopefully it's obvious, but the reason for recording is that, when I'm teaching today, we have 15 people in the room right now. There's probably another 150 people who wanted to be here and couldn't because schedules conflicted, or it's the weekend or whatever. So by recording this class, we we now have the ability to share this content with those people. However, one of the things that is kind of new for people is to think about when they're doing a class, not just what's good for the students who are in the class, but also what's going to be good when we record this class and play it back later. Now, certainly whether you record the class is entirely up to you. Classes don't have to be recorded, and so if you don't want to deal with that, then that's totally your call. But if you do decide you want to record the class, which is definitely a great thing, it's really important to give some thought into, okay, when someone watches this after the fact, how is this going to appear? So the first thing is to think about what this is going to look like as a recording. Now, if I decided that I wanted to make my video window really small, and I made my presentation window really small, and I made my chat log really big, and there's lots of things I can do to control how this looks. However, having said that, I think the optimal way to conduct the class is to have the things that someone's going to need to watch after the fact to be as large as possible. So the chat window can actually be pretty small, because after the fact, whether you will have people read the chat or not, that's not that big of a deal. But certainly your video window you want to have as large as you can, accounting for certainly you want to have good performance. And the presentation also you want to have as large as you can. You want to have the font on your presentation be very large, because if we upload this to YouTube, that's going to shrink this window even smaller. And so you need to account for that and think about what that's going to look like for your students. And you also want to think about what this is going to sound like as a recording. So I've been reading all the comments in the chat log, and one of the things you've noticed is that very rarely will I respond to the comments. And it's not that I don't love all the people who are commenting, but it's that if I respond to comments in the chat pod right now without really referencing those comments, then somebody watching this class after the fact is going to be like, huh? Like, what are they talking about? So a lot of times with our recorded classes, we actually won't include the chat log as part of the recording. So what you can do if someone asks a question is you can repeat that question. So for instance, somebody asked me a question. I'll take a sip of tea while not all at once. So Sandra asks, where are the recordings stored? That's a good question. So we have a server farm where these recordings are stored. We actually haven't made a lot of the recordings available yet. That's something that we're kind of working through. It's still the beta period for us. But in the future, we'll make these recordings available to the people who sit in on the class, and then ultimately, and a lot of this is going to depend on a case-by-case basis based on what the teacher wants to do, but we can make them available as well to the rest of the eduFire community. So, so basically that was my illustrating a question where I basically said, Sandra asks this. So it gives that person who's watching this class after the fact a frame of reference, and I repeated the question because certainly that person didn't hear the question since it was only asked in a chat pod. And Daniel asks, why do I speak so fast? Hopefully I'm not speaking too fast. We'll actually talk about that here in a few minutes, because it's actually good to check in with your students and to find out, are you going too fast? Are you going too slow? That type of thing. So we'll talk about that in a little bit here. And the third bullet point here is don't feel like you have to get it perfect the first time. There's going to be a learning curve when you're recording a class. The best thing to do is to do a class, record it, then watch the recording afterwards and see, does this, look at it objectively and think, is this something that somebody would actually want to watch after the fact? And if you structure your class effectively, most likely it will be, but it may not be right out of the gate. You may need to spend a little bit of time kind of thinking about the size of different things on the screen, how you're answering questions throughout the class. Those types of things are very important. So, moving on to tip number 8, question